I'm a collector of books and such, and I found this little blurb that I wanted to share with you. It's titled Attention. Attention is as critical to good gardening as water or fertilizer. All plants exist in a state of constant change, so wise gardeners work with their eyes as well as their hands. As we attend to our gardens, we notice small problems before they grow into big ones. But more importantly, we witness a timeless drama that is played out between plant, animal, earth, and man, or woman. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "The landscape belongs to the person who looks at it." He understood that the beauty of nature should never be taken for granted. Every garden presents an amazing visual show. The more closely we observe, the more bountiful our rewards. No wonder the best gardens are those that are carefully watched. So, if you don't have time to work in a garden, you're probably not going to reap really what you want to get out of that garden. Okay, so today I'm going to share with you some things on getting ready for spring. We will talk about these topics. We're going to go through some cleanup things, getting your soil tested, a little bit on pruning, amending your soil, just a little bit on picking out plants. So that could be a whole class in itself. Actually, all of these topics could be a whole class in itself. So this is like a lot of things thrown together. And I will heavily address mulch at the end because mulch is very important to having a successful garden. Okay. So, cleaning up your debris. I think we're in spring now. I think it came yesterday or Sunday, but that's not to say it's really here. But most of us, if we have a garden, we've been at least looking at it, if not already walking in it and getting ideas. And so, if we have trees that have dropped twigs, the leaves, I have beech trees, so those leaves fall last. So, I'm looking at getting in and cleaning up. This is a time of the year where we clean up. And I'm one that does not throw very many things in the trash can. I will probably, unless it's a really wicked weed, I will compost all my weeds. There's this great garden speaker, lecturer, speaker. He's a former agent out of one of the southern states, Felder Rushing. I've listened to him speak a few times, and he says, pile it up, leave it be. Well, if you have an area where you can do that, you can dump wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow load of weeds and that sort of thing and just let it go. And I've got one of those piles that's been there for 3 years. I'm going to get in there this year and move it around because I now have soil there or compost that I can pull from that and put back in my garden. So this is what I do when I do my winter cleanup. And another trick that I do is I take wire. You buy it at Lowe's or whatever. It's like a fencing wire, and I make a big circle about yay big, and I cut the wire and weave it together to fasten it. And I discovered if I take a piece of rebar and run one piece, weave it through to hold it, I have those towers placed around my property, and I create compost heaps in that fashion as well. And then through the year I might dump my kitchen scraps in there as well. I stumbled upon this accidentally when a trash can fell off somebody's truck as it drove by, and it just sat there, and I started throwing weeds in it one day. Forgot about it for 2 years. And then I moved it, filled it up again, and we had an acorn squash for dinner one night, and I just was throwing my kitchen stuff out. The next spring I had a beautiful, beautiful plants. That was the best acorn squash I've ever grown, and I didn't even plant it. So my thought is these towers eventually will produce good soil. Now when I'm ready to plant in them, I probably will amend it a little bit, but there I have a place to grow something that takes a lot of space. And if I don't have space in my garden, these things can roam around. And I might get some squash or some melons out of it. So that's the thought process behind it, and I share that with you. Perhaps it will work for you as well. It's the time of the year where your perennials are coming alive. My daylilies are popping through the ground, my black-eyed Susan, the Shasta daisy. So many things that I have divided and moved around in the fall are just really perking back to life. I'm in that process of expanding gardens, so I mend definitely in the fall. But it's time now for us to really be looking for where you have something planted. Did it come back? Some things won't. I mean, depending on the harshness of the winter, some perennials don't survive. The up and down temperatures also, plants will heave themselves out of the ground, meaning the warm and the cold, they won't stay rooted, and that can be death to a plant if you aren't really staying on top of it. A little bit on getting your soil tested. I brought kits along for everybody. It costs $10 to do this, but basically these are the instructions. You go into your area where you want to sample your soil, go down 4 inches, push away the topsoil, have yourself like a metal bucket, plastic could work, and get yourself a little piece of that soil that's down there. And do this from several places in your garden area. Now for me to do it, it's going to cost me $100 because I'm going to have several areas to do it. And I haven't done it yet. $100 can be used elsewhere right now. But then you mix that together and you put it in this little box. Close it up and mail it. Now I would recommend you don't put this in the mail. I would recommend you put it in yet a plastic bag and another little box simply so that it gets there safely. But the instructions on how to do this is all on this form. This is for the homeowner. There's also a form for commercial, meaning the farmers. But it's all kept over at the extension office, and we have them at the libraries. So they are readily available anytime you would need one. Find those locations and just help yourself. And tell a neighbor, you know, because it's important to know what's in your soil. The best thing about this is it's sent to tech and they analyze it. Because this is the time of the year where things are getting a little busy. So if you're wanting to do it soon. Because the later we get into spring, the more people that are going to be hopping on this bandwagon. The results will come back to you, but the results also come back to the extension office. So if you can't read that report, you can call or email, and our agent, Marcus Williams, can explain it to you. That's what he's there for, to help us understand the scientific behind all of it. So I'm getting ready to sell my house in about 5 or 8 years, so I'm going to make sure that this is in my book with all my garden journals when I sell, so that anybody looking into buying will know what my soil is. They'll see how I build it so that it goes along with the gardens and explains, you know, how they can be maintained. So I would recommend you check into that if you want to know what's in your soil, to know how you build it, and that's all on that. There's another flyer that was given to me by the HR Green organization. It explains this process in here as well about soil sampling, and there's a flyer up here, I think, for everybody. Okay, so let's assume you've done that and you've gotten your report back, and it says you have to amend your soil. And I'm not going to talk about specifics here. I'm just going to in general say you're going to use composted materials, whether they be something you've composted, you purchased either from a nursery or even in a bag at the garden center. There are good products out there. They don't have to be expensive. Some of the best things I buy are from Walmart, and they're the lower end brand. I garden in mass, so I spread it around, and then I might get some premium stuff and sort of sprinkle that around. But there are some products out there that can help you really amend that soil. But you work it in. Take a little claw. I have, it's made by Fiskars. It's called a manual sort of tiller. And I stand on it. The prongs are like this big, and I'll put my foot in the area, and I push it into the ground, and then I twist. And it loosens the soil. And so I manually loosen my soil. And that way I don't have equipment in my area, because I don't want equipment in there. It's just not needed in the area I'm at. So that's how I loosen a lot of my soil. And then after I add my whatever concoction of amendments, I might do that again to blend it in. So that's how I've amended several areas that were really quite soggy, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it all survived after the first winter of not being in such a soggy area. I'm one of those people that lost a lot of trees to the water pipes going along Route 10. So I'm still amending that new area into a beautiful garden. So it'll get there one of these days. After you get your soil ready, don't walk on it if you don't have to, because you've now fluffed it up. The air is down there. The microorganisms need to move around. And by walking on it, you're packing it down. So like there's an example, this woman has put some different boards or something down to sort of step on, so that, you know, she doesn't have to step on all of the areas. I threw a little bit in here about vegetable gardening, because most people, when you say the word garden, that's all they think about: tomatoes, tomatoes, tomatoes. So you need to ask yourself, Why do I want to have a garden? Why do I want to grow veggies? Well, you should really consider, what do you want to eat? What does your family want to eat? If nobody in your family eats red beets, don't plant red beets. It's a plant that we can easily sow the seed, but if nobody eats them, why waste your time and space and money on that? Focus on the things that they're going to eat. And I'll get into some seasonal things here as well. And then sizes. Well, there's 2 people in my family and I grow enough for 30. Throw it all away. I don't use it all. So I put it in the compost pile. But so again, plan for the amount that you need. Next is how much time. I think you all are gainfully employed, so that means you're busy 8 or 9 hours a day. That already impacts on the time you have to dedicate to a garden. I've heard somebody say, if you can't spend 1 hour in your garden a day, you may not get the yield you want out of it. That could be touch and go depending on the type of the garden that you have. If you have a container garden, it's all on your deck, and you can pop out there every evening to just check on things, maybe you don't need that hour. But if you have a dedicated garden, and the farther your garden is away from your door, the less likely you're going to go check on it every day. That's why they're called kitchen gardens, and they were nearer to our back door or to our kitchens. That's an old term. But consider the amount of time you have. And with that obviously goes the challenge of the crop, the space you have, the sun, the trees. Do you have a water source? All of those factor in. If you have to carry water or even lug a hose, you know, that's time. So plan all of that in the planning of you wanting to do a garden. Maybe start small. Be successful with small before you be successful with medium or large, so that you get those facts down and you know what you're doing. I always bite off more than I can chew and then gripe about it all summer. Some things never change. So I now have 3 slides on what grows best vegetables in this area. You have warm seasons, cool seasons, and things that take a lot of space. If you have a postage stamp garden, don't plant pumpkins. You don't have room for pumpkins. But for the warm season, you have a couple beans, cherry tomatoes, some peas. Swiss chard grows pretty easy. And peppers. Most of these are things you can buy by plants versus seed. And they'll grow pretty well for you if you have just a small plot. Now when the cool season is, this is where things have gone in the ground starting about a month ago, and we've got a tight window yet. We can still get a couple things in. I planted beets and onions and carrots and chard and a couple other things just about 2 weeks ago. And if I find time, I'm going to go back and replant it all this week so that I have succession. So that I have one crop. When one crop is growing and getting ready to harvest, the other one's kind of like an infant stage. So if I can have that in 3 or 4 intervals, it means I might have fresh lettuce all the time. So radishes will grow fast. They're like a 25, 30-day turnaround. Your lettuces will grow fast, but they don't like to grow in the hot summers. However, if you can grow them and quickly harvest them, you might be successful for having lettuce. But if you're not going to get to it, it'll bolt. That's the word for a lettuce going to seed. It'll bolt real quick, and then it's not edible. It just loses its taste. It gets bitter. So lettuce is what we call more of a cool season thing. There are tricks around that though. You can maybe provide like an umbrella or shades for it so that you can have a shady area and not have the full sun beating down on it. Requiring extra space. I really don't recommend that anybody in this room try to grow asparagus their first year of gardening. It's one of the most challenging crops to grow, and it needs space, meaning if you are familiar with how asparagus grows, it's usually off to the side, along a fence row, because when you plant it on year 1, you pretty much aren't going to touch it until year 3. And after each year after that, it gets stronger and hardier and becomes a plant that can give you a yield. So asparagus is something that is a challenging crop to grow, which is why I have it under that. And again, you might not have space. you know, if it needs that space, you have to dedicate to that, and you want it for something else, again, how bad do you want it? So I'm not even going to try to grow asparagus in this area because I'm leaving in several years. You know, why am I going to spend all that effort to just leave it behind when somebody might not want it? But homegrown asparagus is one of the best things you can have. So research and study up on it if you want to include that, you know, somewhere in your future. A little bit more challenging, eggplant, peanuts. I don't know why we'd want to plant peanuts. We can just buy them so easily here. Pole beans, slicing tomatoes, some of your squashes and peppers. These are some of the things you can buy, I think almost all of these, except for the pole beans and the squash, as plants, you know, at your garden center. Beans and squash are planted so easily by seed that, you know, you can buy them as plants, but why bother? But yet, you know, they are just a little bit more challenging to get started. If you can get them going, you're probably going to be off well, but sometimes you have a challenge getting them started. In your cool season, again, you see some of the greens, your onions, spinach. Spinach is hard to grow in this area, and it bolts real quick if you don't get it in the right time. I think I planted some, but you know, I've never had any luck with it, so I plant every year, and one of these years I might have some luck with it. Needing extra space, again, your melons, your corn. When we say corn needs extra space, you just don't plant one stalk of corn. You need 3 or 4 rows of corn. It needs to pollinate. So that's where the space comes in for growing corn. And some of your real challenging things, celery. I don't know anybody that grows celery, but again, it's just such a hard crop to grow. Brussels sprouts, some of your wintry, cooler kind of beans. And of course, your big pumpkins need lots of space. So now I got that information from one of the best resources out there. It's called Vegetable Gardening for Southerners. The lady who wrote this is Ira Wallace, and she lives in Louisa, Virginia, and she is part of the Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. I never quite get those words in the right order. And it's a co-op where they sell organic seeds, excellent seeds, excellent everything. This book is dynamite. It talks about how to get gardening going, but then it goes month by month. What do you plant? What do you harvest? How do you take care of it? Super book, super book. So when to plant means simply follow guidance, like a book like that. It's written for our area. And she's a master gardener, so I feel safe in saying we can use her product. Hit the Virginia Cooperative Extension or North Carolina, because we're so close to them. Hit those extension websites, see what they have. There are so many pamphlets on the websites that you can just PDF, you know, download them and print them, or just go to them as a resource when you need them. We have them available in the extension office, but most days we can just do so many things just from our laptops, so that, you know, we can, without going an extra place to find something, we have it at our fingertips. And there's probably some TV shows out there. I don't sit in front of the TV very much, but my husband sort of blocks all those channels from me. So, so I really don't get a chance to do that and get any more ideas. I recommend that if you're going to start gardening, and I should take this guidance for myself, is start a journal. What did you plant? How did you do it? Was it a success? What did I do wrong? And learn from it. Somehow I keep these pieces in my mind as I go from year to year. But I have to get started soon because I'm selling that house, so I want those gardens to be documented. But, you know, I know that I planted eggplants in my shade garden one year, and they grew well. Don't know why. But I planted them out in the sun and they didn't grow well. Eggplants do need sun. Again, I'm only growing for 2 people, so I didn't need a lot, and it provided exactly what I needed for 2 people with a little bit of extra. But, you know, so those things, I know that I can grow some things in the shade even though they shouldn't do that well. And out in the sun, maybe it's because the shade garden's closer to my house. I water it more. You know, that might have just been the simple trick as to why I had a higher yield. But writing those notes down will be helpful for you or somebody else that might be looking at your journal from time to time. The almanac is a good thing. Some people plant by the moon. No, they don't go out and plant in the moonlight. I have a friend who grows sweet potatoes. Even though he grows them well, he still tells me he learns every year. And he said the one crop that he planted by not following the almanac and by the moon on when to plant, did not do near as well as the one that he followed using the guidance from the almanac with the moon. So go figure. You know, it might have just been in his head, or there might be some science behind that. But if I could have any wish come true to this day, well, there's 2 or 3, but one of them would be I wish I could have my grandparents alive for an hour or 2 just to talk gardening. Because I didn't think about it when I was young. I was busy doing my military career, not home, and yet I knew we grew up gardening and I learned things, but oh, if I could sit down now and just say, Grandpa, how did you do that? You know, the knowledge is there. So if you have somebody older in your life that, you know, that has garden that you can grab those details from, do it. Because one day when you want them, they might not be there. And I just think there's a lot of interesting information out there that we should grasp, you know, to pass along to the next generation. Okay, here's a picture of planting. Those are little onions. Those are called onion sets, and it definitely is the time to get those in the garden if you are wanting to do that. I planted the onions, the bunching onions, so they're going to be more like the green onions that we buy. So that's what I have put in my garden. Now this is a picture of seeds being planted, and you see there's a little square formed there. A lot of people, including myself, garden using what's called the square foot gardening principle. And square foot is an intensive gardening thing. You plant really close. So square foot is designed 4 by 4. You have a 4-foot square bed. And in that you can get 16 feet. And then you are supposed to rope it off. I don't do that part. And you plant your crop according to these boxes or squares. Now, I work with kids. And I learned in working with kids that it's hard for them to handle little seeds when they're out in the garden. And one of the Master Gardener books on teaching children said, why don't you have the children glue their seeds to a paper towel? Well, I'm a big kid. I started doing it for my garden. You take the paper towel, which is roughly 12 inches if you think about it, and you fold it in squares, a lettuce or a Swiss chard, 4 plants to a square. Well, if you're teaching a kid, you can incorporate math into this procedure. Carrots and red beets and a couple other things, radishes, can be planted 16 to a square. So again, you fold and fold and fold, and you just use basic Elmer's glue, and you glue that seed into the middle of that square. And we're working with children at Hill Point Elementary right now, and they got the homework assignment to do that last week, glue those seeds down. And tomorrow I'm going to go out there and we're going to quickly plant them. So I take that, and I label my towel obviously, and I take the paper towel to the garden and I sit it in my square and I put soil on top of it. Some seeds basically want very little soil, some might want a little bit more, but you know, follow the guidance of whatever you're planting. What an easy way to plant. It leaves the seeds in the house, and I'm not dropping them or spilling them or planting way too many. I have control over how many I put in that square. And I might put more than one, because sometimes the seed does not germinate. When I'm working with red beets, I don't care if I have multiple, because, you know, as they come up, I can clip those leaves and use them in my salads. You know, and then eventually leave one red beet there to grow, so that only that one is having the space to grow. So this is a way that I think it's a good way to grow plants, and makes it easier for you. Now, when you are doing this square foot thing, this is very, very tight spacing. And although you should rotate crops in a regular garden, if you are doing this, you probably will rotate by square versus by whole bed. So when my lettuces have grown, maybe I want to plant string beans there next. Well, then I can just loosen my soil, amend it if I need to, and now plant another crop. So that's the beauty of doing this square foot or intensive gardening, is that by really focusing on what you're doing, you can have multiple crops from that area, but you really have to watch it and know when you can go in and out as far as having plants. Somebody that, another author that I follow, starts all of her own seeds to grow plants, and she always has a nursery. so that she has them ready to go in when she has the space available. So there's a window for putting tomatoes and eggplants and those things in, and if you miss the window, you'll still get a harvest, but it won't be as good. But she has this down to a science. She used to grow to sell at market, so she really had it to a science to know how her plants could come in and out to provide that yield. Proper spacing. Now, I was focusing on square foot. If you're not doing square foot, the instructions for how to plant are on the packet of seeds. I do have a couple up here. 6 inches, 12 inches. Sometimes you plant thick and you thin. It depends on the crop and how you grow. But follow the guidance of that crop. Make sure you have sunlight and water. We now have a well in, so I have plenty of water everywhere. My husband goes, use the water you paid for the well, so I'm using it. And like I mentioned, cover your seed, but do it accordingly to what the packet instructs you to. Plant like plants together. Well, I keep my roots in one area. I keep my leafy things in one area. So that way, you know, they're growing the same sort of like style. I expect them to harvest about the same time. We can take that to the flower garden or the perennials. If you have a garden where you have things that like water and things that don't like water, well, you don't put water, no water, water, no water. You know, keep the watery things together and the no or the low watery together, because, you know, that's going to, again, help you with your time. If you can walk around with a watering can one day to hit only a few plants versus drag the hose to only those few, look how much time you've saved. So, and it's better for the plants as well. So keep those like plants in the same areas if you can. Clashing colors. Your garden is your garden. You can plant whatever you want, even if the colors clash. A lot of us plant for wildlife, so we really don't care about the colors. I plant for the butterflies and the finches more than I do to eat. That's why the vegetables don't always do so well. But again, it's if somebody says, boy, you were colorblind on that day, just tell them, it's my garden, I can do what I want. But don't plant the tall things in front of the short things. You know, that's where you do want to have a little bit of knowing how your plants are going to look. So if you have the black-eyed Susan that gets real tall, don't put something that's much shorter behind it that it cannot be seen. Learn your plant characteristics. Some plants multiply fast, some don't. Anybody want orange daylilies or ditch lilies? I've got a couple thousand I can spare. Black-eyed Susans, these are very prolific. They just multiply fast. So know a little bit about what you want to put in before you put it in. Daylilies don't mind moist soil. Oh boy, I found a place for them. Now I'm waiting for them to grow so it can be pretty there and not look so boring in that part of my landscape. So pick your plants wisely. Location, location, location. You know, the sun. Do you have a shady area? Are you doing curb appeal? These are all factors there. And when you're dealing with trees, you know, you can grow some things under trees. But if it's a walnut tree, you better stay away from that, because it excretes something into the soil that does not do well with a lot of the other plants, especially vegetables, that you might be trying to grow. So when getting a garden ready, you need to obviously get the area ready. And we've talked about picking up the winter debris. Well, you probably have some weeds that have drifted in there. I know I have a lot. You know, I don't know what happens to me every fall, but something hits me and I don't ever get done what I want to do in the fall, totally. So I have all of these weeds I need to get out of there. And that's important, because if I'm lifting and refurbishing a plant, I want to put it back so that it's in good soil and not in one that has weeds, because the weeds will steal. They'll take the water, they'll take the nutrients, and you want that to go to the plant you're trying to grow. Especially if it's going to be producing flowers, it needs that to give you that color. If you have clay, and most of us have a little clay in this area, that's where the organic matter is so important. You know, loosen that clay, amend it with your compost. And there's various kinds of compost. I use, if I'm buying it in a bag, Walmart has one. It's called humus material. And I will use that. It's not expensive at all. It's good. If I'm buying from Lowe's, A little bit more pricier, it's a yellow bag. It's called Black Cow. Excellent material, excellent. And there's other kinds. I mean, those are just the two brands that a lot of us master gardeners stick to, simply on the crop and the amount that we're doing. If you want to use mushroom compost, be careful. It's very, very rich, and you don't need a lot to do what you need to do. So I'm going to dabble in mushroom compost this year, but probably just a little bit per plant so that I know that I'm not going to kill it because it's so strong. Another good compost is horse manure, aged horse manure. If you use fresh animal manure, and dog and cat manure does not work. That's forbidden in the garden. Even the animals are forbidden in my garden. But horse and cow manure might be a good manure or compost kind of thing to use, but not fresh. It has to age. And that's because of the weeds. You know, what they eat, the aging, the heating up. When a compost pile heats, it gets that internal temperature that's, I don't have it memorized, really high, and that kills the weed seeds. And so that's why you have to use aged manure. You can go to North Carolina and buy in a bag composted horse manure. It's from Carolina Compost. Excellent stuff. Every now and then they come up into this area at different shows and have like a table. But if you ever see that, and sometimes we have it to sell at our sales, if you ever see that product, it's not that expensive and it is really good. And again, you don't plant the whole plant in it, you just add a little bit of it to the plant that you're putting in the ground. But you will see good results. We have one of our members has over 600 varieties of daylilies in her garden, and yes, you heard me. And she lives by this stuff. She feeds them with that every year, and she gets the beauty. She sees it in her crop, so it is a good product. Chicken manure can be used, but I think it's a very rich one. So again, I'm not familiar with using that, so I would go.
A lot of nitrogen.
No, I was going to say nitrogen. So you would want to read on the percentages of how much to use or how to blend it with others. But yeah, nitrogen is what came to mind as I said that as well. And I don't have chickens, no, and we're not getting chickens. I have 3 dogs, so the chickens wouldn't live long. Okay, and if you're adding fertilizer to your soil, always remember, follow the instructions. Don't just like, well, if 1 teaspoon's good, I'll give it 2. No, because the extra is not needed. Eventually, it will run off, and where does it run off to? The water sources. The rivers, the creeks, the bay, what have you. There's enough bad stuff out there. We don't need to be putting more. And we as homeowners are much guiltier than the farmers as to the amount of fertilizer we use. So be easy on the fertilizer. Try to go organic as much as you possibly can. General fertilizer, a lot of us use the Osmocote. The one that can last all season. And so that's the little granules. So if you do that, don't put that in the ground in the summer or the fall. You want to get that in the spring so you have your seasons of it. You don't want that fertilizer deactivating itself and coming alive in the winter when your plants are trying to sleep. So use those many seasonal kind of fertilizers, at the right time so that you are helping your plants and not hurting them in the long run. Okay, so we're back to putting this plant in the ground. We're eventually going to get it there. So we're digging a hole. Make the hole a little bigger than the pot itself. So if you have like a 1-gallon container, sort of like 1.5, 2 gallons is the size of the hole you would make for it. And if you have a lot of clay in your area, you want to really take that soil that you've taken out and amend it good with organic matter. Take your plant out of the pot. Is it root bound? Most of the plants that you do buy from a nursery have a little bit of root bound stuff going on there. So try to loosen those roots. Take a gardening knife or a trowel or something and just loosen them up. You really, unless you sever them off completely, you won't hurt the plant. And this comes from the plants or even the little, the ground coverings that we buy, the little pansies and that sort of thing. But Some people soak their plant before they plant it, some don't. I usually don't, but it depends on how long it's been sitting. But the recommendation is that you soak that plant, loosen the roots, put it in the ground now. You want to make sure that you're planting so that the crest of your plant is at ground level. You don't want to have it sitting above the ground, and you don't want to bury it too deep. It needs to be at ground level. If there are exceptions out there, you'll know about them. There are a couple plants that might have that, but very few. We tend to plant at ground level. Put your soil back in now. Pat it down. Don't stand on it and stomp on it. Just pat it down firmly with your hands, because you don't want to hurt those roots. They're babies. They need to now grow. You have challenged their growing. You've disrupted them, and now they need to go find life again. So don't be too harsh on them. And water it well. When we talk about watering, just walking by your garden with the hose and giving it a drop or two is not watering. That's called teasing. Plants need water to provide you the crop, meaning fruit or flowers. So you need to learn how much water they want. A lot of them like at least 1 inch a week. And if you have trouble gauging 1 inch a week, get yourself a tuna can. A tuna comes in, and sit it down where you're watering. And while you're watering and not moving, if you're just like watering this area and the can's there, gauge how long it takes for you to fill that can. That way you know the time that's needed for watering that area for about 1 inch of water to get into the ground for those roots. I mean, most gardeners I know do use this philosophy, so it's been proven that it's a good way to learn what 1 inch is. I'm going to get to mulch a little bit later on. Slugs and snails. I hate having them in my garden. How about you? Does anybody know how do you get rid of a slug? Salt. Is there another one? Beer. Beer. Beer is it. Beer and salt. I often carry a salt shaker with me to the garden. But if you want to trap them, something about the beer, that slug will go after the beer and he'll drown. So, another thing might be, depending on some of the pests for the garden, you might lay a board down in your pathway. Some pests will go to the underside of that board. If you think there's going to be snakes in your area, be cautious when moving that board, because you don't want to be startled. And anybody that knows me knows that snakes aren't welcome in my garden, although they're there. Snakes are good for rodent control and that sort of thing. As long as it's a good snake, as long as he doesn't bother me and startle me, he's okay. But he better not be doing anything else, or I can't imagine what will happen to him. But anyhow, it's called cultural control of a pest when you do these certain things. Hand-picking a pest off of a plant, or turning that board over and finding all of a certain pest there. That's when you then pick it up with your hands, wear garden gloves, okay, and have a pail of soapy water, and you just deposit these pests or bugs into that soapy water, and then you dispose of them later. So it's called cultural. It's a little bit tedious, but it's your way of getting rid of the pest, and you're not putting chemicals down to do it. If you have children in your life, penny a piece, quarter a piece, depending on what they're after. I've heard people say it works real well. I don't have kids. Those dogs just haven't learned how to do that yet. Dividing plants. This is a time of the year where many of us do the division of our plants, especially those daylilies, Shastas, the black-eyed Susans, and the list goes on. Lift it. Tease it apart if you can. If that doesn't work, get a good garden knife, slice it apart, or maybe get 2 forks back to back and tease them apart this way. I've used every different way that out there, and it depends what the plant is as to how I'm dividing. A knife is the most common one. I carry an old steak knife with me in many of the parts of my garden so that I can quickly just zip those things apart, then carry them to my potting bench and repot or throw them away if it's, in the case of daylilies, and I have way too many. Watch for the growth to come back now this spring, and if you want your clump to grow, that's great, but sometimes when your clump gets too big, it starts dying. It's detrimental that the plants stay that way, and by dividing it, you give it new life. So in some plants, the life cycle is only so many years because it's intended that you divide it so that you take the bad part out and you still have the new part, you know, to continue on. And share with your friends. And then I mentioned how to plant, but you know, for the part that you are keeping, you know, like we discussed earlier, prepare your soil, especially for putting it in a new location, not back to where it was, and put it in there, treat it well, give it a good watering, and you should be good to go. If it's really hot that day, you might want to give it a little shade, especially if you're not doing this in the morning. Just remember, anytime you're out beyond the morning hours and you're moving plants around, it's all the harder for a plant to just do anything, to just bounce back and grow and do whatever. The cooler part of the day is best. A little bit on pruning. Don't do that to your trees, please. When I drive by a business that has that, I just want to stop and go in and say, who did that? You know, it's not good for the plant and it looks terrible. So here's a cheat sheet that I found. Anytime you have a branch that's dead on your tree or your bush, well, you prune that out. It does not need to be there. It's just, you know, you don't have to wait till a certain time of the year. You really shouldn't prune from September into January. I mean, a lot of people do, but that's just not a good time to be doing this. Your azaleas and camellias, after they're done blooming, that's the time to cut those spent blossoms off. Roses, well, gee, mine haven't gotten done yet, so that means next week I'll be out there. I'm still running a little late. And the same for boxwoods. I don't know about you, but my boxwoods this year, which I didn't want, but they're there, in one of those growth warm periods we had, they shot up new growths, and then it froze right away. You know, so I have these light green shoots coming out of my boxwoods, which meant that was new growth trying to come in a warm period that shouldn't have been. So I'm definitely going to prune those back. Now when I'm pruning and I'm hopping from plant to plant, I'm also probably carrying a bottle of alcohol with me, not the drinking kind, okay? And or a bottle of Listerine or the dollar store variety, so that I can, with a paper towel, I can wipe my shears or my scissors or knife or whatever with, so that I don't take any germs from one plant to the other if there would have been one. So having clean equipment is really important. Okay, evergreens, while the plant is dormant. When you have crepe myrtles, they have all those suckers. You can prune those off at any time, and that goes for any kind of plant that produces those suckers. It's we're going to be getting into those perennial grasses soon, so you know, again, watch for when they might need pruning, and based on the kind of plant, to take care of it then. Butterfly bush, it's a time of the year we probably can start looking at cutting it back. So if you have a butterfly bush that's this big, you probably can take it back to almost 2/3. I usually go to take 1/3 off, maybe a little bit more, but you can take it down 2/3. That's what the books say. I've usually not done that, but the books say you can do that. One of the gardening books that I look to for a lot of guidance, this is an old one, but it's the garden book from Southern Living. It's just, hey, we live in the South. And I found this one at a thrift store, and there's a new one out. I think they just put a new one out like within the last 2 years. And I'm like, well, this works. I'm not going to spend 40 bucks on that new book. This is awesome. Plant by plant, alphabetical. It tells me what to do when. If you're putting a garden in and you don't know what to put in, this is for the Mid-Atlantic area, the Book of List. I thought, all I need is another book of lists. You know what? This is one of the best books out there. Am I dealing with shade? Am I dealing with deer problems? Am I dealing with whatever? It has a list for anything in here. This will tell you what will and will not work best in those areas. Now I have a couple of slides just on crepe myrtles. It tells you how to do it. Obviously early spring, they bloom on new growth. March 1st is like a deadline for most of us to take care of this. And The seed pods, they do not really affect, those can be left on. They won't hurt next year's flowering. And it shows you here how to do it. Come down to about here, cut that off. Okay, next. And then from where you cut it off, it'll put 2 shoots out. So if you want a nice bushy crepe myrtle, that's how to do it. And if you see somebody who's done it wrong, give them a piece of your mind. A little bit on mulch and then we'll be done. Mulch really is one of the best ways you can finish your garden, and it's good for your garden. It prevents your soil from eroding, it puts nutrients back in, it collects moisture for your plants so the soil stays moist and those roots have a chance to have that moisture, helps to keep weeds under control, keeps your fruits and vegetables clean. Now most of us don't mulch in the vegetable garden, but you might find maybe some pine straw or something like that to put down, or straw, because when it rains, the dirt would splatter back up against those tomatoes and peppers and whatever, and hey, if there's a way to keep that down so it's not as much work on you, consider trying that out. We're going to have several things on mulch here. This looks good. That one not so good. And yet the city of Suffolk thinks it's really nice to do volcano mulching, as we call it, all around town. And I just don't understand why they think it looks so nice, because it's one of the worst things you can do. You're killing the tree. It can't breathe. Those roots need room or need space to grow, to breathe. And by putting a little bit of mulch, they can still. But when you pack it down and then up around the trunk, in time that tree will show signs of stress. It may not die, but it won't be healthy. The branches might not produce as well, or there'll be a crack somewhere that will mean almost the death of the tree, but eventually it will take a toll on the tree, and the whole idea of planting a nice tree is to have it around for a long time. So if your neighbors are doing that, you just say, hey, I learned we really shouldn't be. A little bit more on mulch. I mentioned that mulch decomposes in brief earlier, but by using organic mulches, please don't buy rubber chipped or shredded or whatever as mulch. They sell it, it looks pretty, but when the rain comes down hard and it bounces back up and goes into the parking lot, it eventually hits the storm drains, and from there, where does it go? Rubber is not organic. It's not going to decompose. So don't use that. Use your organic matters. I have a couple pictures here. Your bark is one of them, and you can buy this in the bags. You can buy it bulk load from various nurseries. Again, spread it around so you have. Some people will say 2 inches, some 3, some say 6. There's a lot of different schools of thought as to how much mulch you put in your garden, but your trees are different than your perennials, and your perennials can handle a lot more of it, and besides, it's probably a fine quality, and it is degrading throughout the whole year, so that 6 inches is not going to be 6 inches by the end of the year. Try to keep the mulch away from your stem. Don't go up and touch it. And that is to help keep the pest away. If a slug's walking around, if he can walk right all the way up there to your plant, you've just given him access. But by staying away from it like an inch or 2, it sort of like it stops. He probably won't go off the mulch, that sort of thing.
And can you put that in the vegetable garden too?
You can. However, I did it one year and it hurt my crop because the soil expends some of its energy to decompose the mulch. So the older the mulch, the better. But new mulch, I'm going to have wood chips here. A tree that's just been taken down and you have that pile of wood chips, it's best to use that for a pathway or something like that, or leave it sit for a few years so that it can start its decomposition right there. The newer produced mulches are not good around your plants because they're not ready to be used in that fashion yet. Pine straw would work. Straw is an excellent mulch in your garden. A newspaper, you could put newspaper down, but newspaper will blow around. So another thing, this is not mulch, but depending on how you know your garden and plant, you can plant things to act as a weed instead of a weed. I just read recently, now this is not gospel, somebody said she plants impatiens with all of her tomato plants because impatiens are poofy and they like to be in the shade. So when her tomato plant is tall, this impatient is becoming poofy and it's keeping, there's no weeds. So you can grow lettuces under tomato plants. A lot of people, you know, when they want to have lettuce in the summer, and besides it tastes good with the tomato is now tall, maybe 1 or 2 lettuces under your tomatoes. You know, try it, see if it works. But so there are some weed control things that you can do with other plants, you know, if you really research what do you think might work best. But I just read that in a magazine over the weekend about the impatiens. You can use leaves, depending on the type of leaf. It's best that you always mulch them or chop them, run them over with a lawnmower. If you use solid leaves, you know, maybe the water won't be able to work its way through those leaves, so chopped is best. In the fall, you might want to chop these leaves up and just stack them up in one of those towers and leave them do their decomposition for a year or two, and then you have excellent, excellent compost and or mulch. Grass clippings, same deal. However, we just mulch our clippings right back into the yard, but if we were to pick them up, I would dump them in a pile and leave them do their thing over there and bring them back later after they've broken down. And never use a grass clipping if you have those chemicals on your yard, because now you're putting that into your compost and or plants, and you really don't want that. I've talked about newspaper. Anytime I am in my garden mulching, I have a stack of newspaper, and at this point I have stacks of cardboard because I am doing a huge area and I put cardboard down. And I clear my area, remove the wall, the weeds, and then I put my mulch on top. And that is a barrier for those weeds. A weed will grow. A weed is nothing but a plant in an unwanted place. And some weeds are good. I buy butterfly weeds. I buy Joe Pye weeds. Those are the kind of weeds I want in my garden. But I don't want, you know, the crabgrass and those kind of things. But if you stay away from the glossy paper and just use straight newsprint, some people say no color. Newspaper today has color on almost every page. It's the glossy that you really don't want in your garden. So don't tear a magazine up and go put that out there. Phone books are pretty good. Again, that's the newsprint kind of thing. But this under that mulch gives you that extra barrier, and I can tell from one year to the next where I have a cycle where it didn't get done the previous year. I don't do every area. I have like a 3-year rotation thing where I go in and divide and refluff and move and all of that, and that's when it gets mulched. So I can tell when I've not been there, because over that 3 years it's gone. And I use heavy. I've learned instead of 2 sheets, I now go with 4 or 5, even 8 sheets of newspaper, or I go with the cardboard. So it just it's worked for me. I think I talked about water earlier. Make sure that you water regularly according to what your plants need, and consider doing a rain barrel. It is free. It's free. We've had classes in the past. We're not doing it right now, but hopefully in the next year or two we're going to get back on track to do that. We just, you know, we're a volunteer organization, and we just sort of need volunteers to do all this. This is not my garden. One can only hope. But colors matter. You know, plan what you're putting in to be beautiful for your eyes or your neighbors or just nature if that's what you want. And then shade. There are colors in shade. The textures and the variegation can really give you a beautiful garden. And containers. A container garden doesn't have to necessarily be that container sitting on your front porch. You might be shopping and find this beautiful, huge urn that you say, I need that. But you're going to plan to sit that somewhere in your garden as a focal point, and yet it can be the container. You have the tall, you have the runny, and then you have the bushy all around it. That's how you do a container garden. You have all of those 3 things that make up the attraction to having a container. And they add dimension. They're so great. And always, no chemicals, think pollinators. There's more than just the honeybees out there that do pollinating. And think about having them in your garden or in your environment, because without them, we wouldn't have what we have. I'm going to be here again in May. I'm going to do a class on herbs, and it's going to focus a little bit on planting, maybe eating, but it's going to be more along the lines of pest control. What can you plant next to somebody that will keep a plant away, keep a pest away from a plant? An example of that would be basil is good next to a tomato plant. It makes the tomato taste better, but it's also good as a pest repellent. So that's going to be May. In June we have butterfly gardens, and one of our master gardeners is like the butterfly collector. She collects seeds and releases them back. So she'll be here in July, and we might do another one towards the end of the year. We haven't locked that down yet. But if you all, meaning anybody, wants classes, we're across the hall, across the street there. We could probably do classes once a month over there and just come only here like a few times a year. We just need to know if you're interested in that, but the topics are endless, you know, starting a seed, propagation, shade, trees, bushes, you name it. You know, we can go into whatever there is a requirement or a request for. And that's all. That's all. My name is Wanda, and that's my email address. Becky will have that if you should want to contact her on anything. And I thank you.